Thank you for having me.
Well, I will tell you that we are very excited to have you. Bowery has had a lot of relationships at NYU Stern. People have been able to do projects working for Bowery. There's a lot of excitement about its mission of sustainability. So maybe you can start by just telling us a little bit more about Bowery, what it is you do, and kind of how you built that company.
That's a short question with a very long answer. So I'll start with what Bowery is, and then I'll let you take it in whatever direction you want. How about that?
Sounds good.
So for those that don't know, Bowery is the modern farming company. And so you kind of ask, well, what's modern farming? We build really large warehouse scale, smart indoor farms that we locate close to the cities that we serve. And in those farms, we grow our crops. You can see the photo behind me, stacked from the floor all the way to the ceiling, underneath lights that mimic the spectrum of the sun. And we can grow 365 days of the year, completely independent of weather and seasonality. So it's reliable, consistent supply of high quality protected produce year round. Now, what gets even more exciting is we grow completely pesticide-free, completely agrochemical-free food. So we use no herbicides, no fungicides, no insecticides. It is as pure and clean as you can find produce. And whereas in the field, if you do that, your quality suffers and your yield suffers. Hopefully everyone on Zoom here has tried our product, so you can attest to the fact that it is like what you grow out of your grandmother's garden. And from a yield perspective, we're over 100 times plus more productive than a square foot of farmland. And we use a very small fraction of water compared to traditional agriculture. And what gets really interesting and exciting is what enables this all to happen is a combination of proprietary robotics and automation, which we design and develop inside of our farms, and then what we call the Bowery operating system. And the Bowery operating system is, you can think about like the brains or the central nervous system of everything inside of the business. And it's a combination of software, hardware, computer vision, and artificial intelligence that not only manages all of the crops that are growing, but manages the entire workflow and the supply chain across our entire farm.
Awesome. And I can confirm as a Bowery customer that is delicious. And my personal favorite thing about Bowery is I think because, and you can tell me if like, what is the science behind this, but my suspicion is because it comes from so close, it stays good in my fridge for like 2+ weeks, which is not standard in the lettuce world. Is that just, the freshness factor? Is there something else there?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a combination of two things. The first piece of it is we build our farms right outside of the communities that we serve. So it takes about a day or two from when we harvest our crop to when we deliver it versus weeks or months of time in the existing supply chain. So it's fresher. It actually has a lot more nutrition because the FDA will tell you that we lose about 50% of the nutritional value in the crops that we eat because of just the amount of time that they have to travel and the way the supply chain works. So it's more nutritious, and then it lasts longer on the store shelves and it lasts longer in your refrigerator. So it's just a better experience in general. The other side of it is because of the technology that we've built, we take really close care and grow our plants with real precision in terms of what they get, what nutrients they get, the water, the light. And so they're grown in a much more healthy, robust way. And so that also lends to lasting longer and tasting better. I'm going to flip it back on you and you can put it back out to everyone. I think a lot of people don't understand a lot about our food supply chain. So just as, when people ask me about how long food lasts, I tend to ask, like, how long do you think the average age of an apple, or how old do you think the average age of an apple is in the grocery store?
Like 20 days.
20 days. I bet you if you ask the group out there, you would get range of different answers. I'm not technically sophisticated enough to figure out how to ask that question, but the answer is somewhere between 10 and 14 months.
Oh my God.
Yeah, which is, and of course, like, in apple season around here, you could get fresh picked apples locally or from Washington, but on average, that's actually how long and how old an apple is. And a carrot's average age is about 9 months. And so the reason is because of this really convoluted and complex supply chain. And if you think about what drives the existing supply chain today, it's the fact that only certain crops can grow at certain times in certain places. And so you have to build this entire supply chain around that reality. And what we've done at Bowery is decoupled that. we can grow our crops anywhere all year round, reliably and consistently. And so we can rebuild and reinvent a supply chain that is safer. It provides more surety of product. It's a lot simpler. It's much more sustainable, and it's more profitable to Bowery as well.
Mm-hmm. And speaking of supply chains, how did COVID-19 impact Bowery? And especially, did it present an opportunity with the supply chains being under such enormous pressure?
Yeah, I think there's two ways to think about COVID. I think it's the first is, just direct business impact. And, I think we're fortunate because we were experiencing a tremendous amount of excitement and momentum long before COVID. And that was really driven by the fact that people around the world are really asking questions, certainly in this country, around where's my food coming from? How is it grown, or how is it made? What is on it or isn't on it? People are looking for transparency, and that's exactly what we can provide in a really unique way at Bowery. And so our product, for all the reasons you were mentioning earlier, lasting longer, et cetera, we already had a lot of interest from retailers and consumers prior to COVID. Now, what COVID did was accelerate that meaningfully. And part of the reason is, and this was the other side of COVID, is I think it helped a lot of people realize how susceptible and how fragile our supply chains really are. And, I think many people in this country and around the world walked into grocery stores on a regular basis and sort of took for granted the fact that you could find whatever you wanted, whenever you wanted, sitting on a store shelf. And COVID happens, and all of a sudden shelves are empty. We can't find products. There's all these shortages. And it really shined a light around how leveraged and dependent we are on not only other regions around this country, but other parts of the world. And so that really also helped to drive a desire to regionalize the supply chain, but also a simpler supply chain and a safer supply chain, which is two things that we absolutely can do at Bowery because we control that supply chain from seed all the way to store.
That makes sense. And then in terms of kind of the challenges that you faced, I mean, running farms indoors during a pandemic, I know you have to staff them 24/7.
Yeah, I think we are really lucky. We have an absolutely exceptional team across the board. And, the passion that people across all of Bowery have and had for ensuring that we could continue to run was really impressive. And I was, amazed at how many people from every part of the organization rallied to make sure that we could continue to run and grow and build. It was a nail biting early part of the pandemic because it was unclear, it was, if everyone here remembers, it was no one knew anything. And so we didn't know if we'd even be able to keep the farms open. And when we were deemed critical and essential business infrastructure, I think that was at least a moment of where we could take a step back and breathe a sigh of relief. We knew the farms would be able to continue to stay open. And then it became about, how do we do that in a way that's first and foremost prioritizing the safety and health of all the people at Bowery. So of course, folks who work in the headquarters in New York City could work remotely. Some people, at least some of their time, spend time in the farms, and other people are in the farms every day. And so we had to think about each of those different groups of people differently and make sure that everybody was safe and everybody was healthy. And I think the other thing that we have a benefit of in our farms is a lot of space, because we use so much automation that people don't stand sort of shoulder to shoulder the way you see in some of those meat packing plants and other areas. So the risk was much less for us than in other food processing businesses.
That makes sense. And you talked a little bit about automation. Can you tell us a bit more about kind of the robotics, AI, any machine learning aspects? Just how do you automate and improve this process?
Yeah, I mean, I could tell you a lot about those things. It's a matter of how much depth you want to go into. But I'd say what's interesting and exciting about what we're doing. Let's take the operating system and the software first. So what we do is we have developed and built an entire sensor and control network. So we have a whole hardware development team, electrical engineers, and software folks on that team as well. And so this sensor and control network takes millions of data points across our farm in real time. And that data impacts how our crops are growing, their health, yield, even taste and flavor. And we take and analyze that data. We also have a plant vision system, which takes photos of our crops in real time and runs those photos through deep learning algorithms and understands both what's happening with the plant today and also predicts what will happen to the crop in the future. And so all that data gets ingested and run through other machine learning algorithms. And we can actually say, based on what we know and what we expect, what tweaks and changes to the environment do we want to make? And those changes get pushed out and automatically adjusted in real time without any human intuition or judgment being required at all. And so that system in itself is really powerful. And it actually now extends all the way into the farm. It helps our farmers know what work to do and when to do it. It helps with scheduling and task management and organization. And that's important because it means anybody can be a farmer at Bowery. So you don't have to have grown crops or grown up on a farm or grown up farming to come work at Bowery. You could work at a distribution center, at a fulfillment center, or in a grocery store, at a Starbucks, or really doing anything. I mean, our farmers come from all walks of life, which is one of the fun and kind of exciting things.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that anyone can be a farmer. So, right, your background is finance, and you helped launch iHeartMedia, and then you founded CrowdTwist. How did you end up becoming a farmer?
Yeah, so like I've been an entrepreneur since I was a young kid. Like 8 years old, I was getting into every little hustle you can imagine, dragging my little brother behind me, leaf raking business, my snow shoveling business. I laugh. I took a stint at drawing pictures and selling them on the street, which was not a very successful venture that we had.
Which was your most lucrative hustle?
So actually, what started as a lemonade stand when I was like 9 years old, turned into a flower selling business where I would sell flowers at college graduations, turned into a t-shirt selling and flower business. And I ended up grossing like $40,000-$50,000 in a weekend in these ventures that grew over many, many years. And then they ended up shutting me down, the Brown Bookstore, because we didn't have the appropriate IP for using the logo. And people started coming into their bookstore asking for our shirts, and they were not taking too kindly to that. But that was easily my most monetarily successful venture. But the funny thing is, there was one commonality I like to think about a lot. No matter what your business is, one of your jobs as a founder is to sell. You've just got to sell all the time. You've got to sell people on your vision. You've got to sell people to come join you. You've got to sell potentially investment dollars, clients, customers. And I think what it did is it taught me to not be afraid to ask people for anything. I mean, you stand on the street and sell people t-shirts and roses that they don't need. Your confidence goes up and your humility maybe goes down quickly or goes up. You can't be shy. And so that was really the basis for me. And the reason I went to banking was I was this naive 21-year-old kid graduating college. And I was like, oh, how do you learn business? I was like, oh, I'll go be an investment banker. And so I went to Wall Street and I was at Citibank, but I helped companies raise late stage capital. So I at least wanted to stick to the kind of businesses I wanted to build and the kind of teams I wanted to be a part of. And that was a great experience, but I had the opportunity to, which I'm sure many people here are going to face this decision soon as well. People said, oh, go come be an associate, go take a hedge fund job, go do this private equity job. And people are saying to me like, oh, do that, make a lot of money, and then go do the thing you want to do in your life. And I kind of looked and I was like, oh, sounds like a great recipe to wake up in 25 years and say, whatever happened to the thing I wanted to do in my life. And I kind of shrugged it off. I actually went surfing around the world for a year and traveled, which was a much better decision. And I came back and, tech was at the time, 04, 05 was nothing like what it is now in New York City. I mean, the ecosystem is so robust and exciting. It was pretty nascent back then. And so that was when I joined Clear Channel, which is the biggest radio group in the world. And I ran a division there that was product and social and content. And while I was there, the iPhone came out and saw an opportunity and ended up building and running iHeartRadio for a while. And I'll fast forward quickly, but so I was working 4 nights a week around a kitchen table with a buddy. While I was there, I knew I wanted to do something of my own and left to start CrowdTwist. After a few years there, raised about 20 million in venture capital, built the business up. We work with folks like Pepsi and L'Oreal and Procter & Gamble and Nestle and American Express. And 6 years in, I kind of put my head up and said, you know what? This is not what I want to do for the next decade of my life. I don't want to do enterprise loyalty. And I'm a big believer that technology can solve hard problems and important problems. And I want to spend my time doing something that I'm passionate about and that matters broadly. And so I left and I went on the hunt for what was next. And here I am today.
And so are you someone that is it the environmental aspect? Is it the food aspect? Is it both? Like what kind of is at the root of that passion?
Yeah. So, it's funny. I think a lot of people, like when they tell stories about founding of companies, they oftentimes fit a narrative to the company after the fact. And so, I always try to be pretty straight, which is, for me, like I grew up around food. My mom was an exceptional chef. She was way ahead of her time. It was like going to the farmer's market and like the antioxidants in this fresh food and the attributes of this. I was very fortunate to have access to all of that. So food was a part of me, but I didn't grow up my whole life saying I must start a food business. I mean, you can see my last company was enterprise software and loyalty, right? What I did always believe is technology and entrepreneurship and innovation can solve hard problems and really drive important solutions forward. And what I started to do as I looked around for what I wanted to do next was, you see, first of all, agriculture is the largest consumer of resources globally and by a huge margin. So 70% of the world's water goes to agriculture every year. We put about 1 billion pounds of pesticides down annually just in the US, and about 6 billion pounds a year globally. And because of the way we farm, we've lost 30% of all of our arable farmland in the last 40 years. And so I looked at that system and I said, obviously there's a huge opportunity to be better. You saw the fact that population's exploding in the next 30 years to 9 to 10 billion people. We need somewhere between 50 to 70% more food to feed that population. And all the while, 70 to 80% of people in the next 30 years are going to live in and around cities. And so I got really obsessed with this question of, how do you get fresh food to urban environments? How do you do it in a both more efficient way as well as in a manner that's more sustainable? And that was really, for me, the jumping off point. It's this important problem. And the other thing that was interesting is, and this is advice I give to everybody, like there was a huge asymmetry between how big of an industry and how old of an industry agriculture is, and yet the number of people from technology in this world who are actually working on problems in agriculture. And I've actually seen that change in the 5+ years since I built Bowery, which is a great thing, but still there's probably a lot more people working on the next great social network than there are necessarily working on problems in agriculture.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I know that I've read some stuff about work that I think Google has done into vertical farming, but I think they tapped out. They figured that they weren't able to vertically grow staple crops like rice and things like that. Have you guys found over time that you're continue to be able to expand? Right now, I know you provide lettuce and herbs. Like, if you can tell us, like, what's kind of in the pipeline, what are you working on? What's cool that you've learned?
So listen, I think what sometimes I'm always interested in is people want the future to be here immediately.
Mhm.
And sometimes you sort of are, you get somewhere and they're like, okay, well, what's next? And so we started with leafy greens and herbs because it made the most sense for us economically. And I'm also just a firm believer that when you're building a company, focus matters immensely. And so you had to focus somewhere, and that was a great place to start. And so we on the shelf have, almost 15 SKUs of leafy greens and herbs today, but we've actually grown hundreds and hundreds of varieties of crops outside of what we sell commercially. We have a world-class agricultural science and R&D team, and we just opened our second R&D and innovation center in Kearney, New Jersey, so about 8 miles away. And in those, with our agricultural science team and in those farms, we have grown many other varieties of greens and herbs that we don't sell, but we are growing vine crops like tomatoes and strawberries and peppers and onions and cucumbers. We're growing root vegetables and tubers. And so there is an enormous amount of opportunity ahead in terms of what we will ultimately commercialize and grow at Bowery. It's about, for crops that are good candidates for indoor farming, it's about $100 billion a year opportunity in the US, and it's about $1 trillion a year globally. And so in that, I don't account for staple crops, corn and wheat and soy. But what I always tell people, like, technology is an interesting way of surprising us, right? Are we going to do that in the next couple of years? I wouldn't count on it. What's going to happen a decade from now? I don't know.
Right. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I can confirm that you are always selling, and I'm here like ready to invest. But let's kind of move on to maybe a little bit less fun stuff. Can you tell us about some of the challenges that you faced while you were founding Bowery and growing the company?
I don't know if I call that less fun though. That's just the game,
Yeah.
right?
But let's put it that way. Like some of your worst days, like what is the stuff that you were dealing with and having to kind of take head on?
I mean, listen, this is a funny one just because like this is just brand new, right? Like nobody done this really before. In fact, that's not true. There were people doing this and we actually learned. I'm not a believer in first mover advantage in most markets, actually. In fact, I think first mover advantage tends to not prove out to generate the leader. And I think you can oftentimes learn a lot from those who come before you, the things that they do right, but even more so the things that they do wrong. And so we gained an enormous amount just from watching and understanding and learning the industry overall. But that said, this was really brand new. There was no playbook and handbook. I mean, my last company was in enterprise software, and granted, no one had built the software we built, but plenty of people had rolled out SaaS companies. And so, there was sort of a general understanding of how one does that and how to structure teams and the metrics you look at and things like that. There wasn't really that here. And so, a lot of this was invention and creation and understanding and iteration and the willingness to get stuff wrong as well as getting stuff right. And I think, one of the most interesting parts of this was, and still is today for me actually, is the cross-functional collaboration that happens at Bowery from teams and individuals that come from such different disciplines and backgrounds. You have agricultural scientists, plant biologists or plant physiologists working alongside a mechanical engineer and a supply chain leader and someone from marketing and product, and everybody coming together to solve the same problem. It's hard because people speak different languages, proverbially, and they think about problems in different ways. So bridging those gaps and figuring out how to do it is tricky, but that's also what makes it really fun.
Yeah. I think that is definitely true. And to that end, what sort of advice, I guess, given all of those challenges you faced in tackling something new, would you give to MBA students who are looking into tech and entrepreneurship?
Do you mean it from the standpoint of starting something or joining something?
Let's start with joining and then we'll move to starting.
It really depends on what experience you want to have. I mean, you guys are super lucky in the sense that, I mean, the ecosystem in New York City or San Francisco or Los Angeles. Now everyone's talking about Miami, apparently. So Miami and, Austin and all these cities across the country. I mean, it is so robust. I mean, there's more going on in technology in Austin today than there was in New York City, when I really started off here. And so the opportunities for people are enormous. And so I think part of the question I would be asking myself if I were in your shoes is, okay, do I want the experience of working at a large established company, where the model is established, the business is established, the teams are established, the ways of working are established, and there's benefits you get from that and things you don't get? Or do I want to do something on the earlier side, taking the other extreme, a much earlier stage company where the business isn't established, where the model isn't established, where the teams aren't established, the ways of working aren't established. And there's enormous amounts you can gain from that as well. But there are other things you don't get that you would get if you went to work at Google or Facebook or Uber or Square or a company like that. And so I think identifying like personally what you want to get out of the experience and then figuring out the stage of company that best matches that and the type of company that best match that is the place I would start, because the opportunities that exist now for you guys going into technology, I mean, really are limitless in some ways. You all the way from starting your own thing to joining a team of 8 to joining a team of 80,000. I mean, you can do anything on either ends of that spectrum and everything in between.
Yeah. And then I guess going to the idea of starting your own company, kind of what advice do you have in that sense? It sounds like from what you were saying that you always knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur. Do you think the most successful entrepreneurs like have that itch to always be selling?
So it's not always be selling even, I think there are people who certainly always have an interest in building something. Although I would expect if you looked across the spectrum of entrepreneurs, actually a smaller percentage would say, yeah, I always knew I wanted to do this. And a larger percentage found their way through the course of their career or stumbled on it sort of serendipitously. And so I don't think that there's any, necessary criteria one must have to do it. What I do think is a necessary criteria is a strong desire and conviction today. Doesn't matter what your conviction and desire was 2 years ago, but you have to have a strong desire and conviction today. Because starting something is not a part-time endeavor. It is not sort of something that you kind of haphazardly stumbled into or dip your toe into casually and occasionally. And when the kind of the whim hits you, it is a completely consuming, engrossing, incredibly rewarding, and excruciatingly difficult at the same time path and challenge and endeavor. And you really have to have a strong and solid desire to live that every day and to be a part of that. And because otherwise it wears you down.
Yeah.
It wears you down even if you have that desire sometimes. That's just the name of the game.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think one thing that we get a lot of questions. And one thing when we have a speaker, people kind of want to hear like the tough stories or the like the vulnerable moments. I think there's a lot of desire for that. Like, what have you had to sacrifice either in your personal life or, like just to make this happen?
I mean, yeah. I don't even know where to start. But one of the great, and I'm not going to get his quote right. But I was listening long ago to that, how I built this episode with the founder of Panera. And at the very end, he was talking about having conversations like this one. And he was talking about how he always tells people that if you're doing this for the money, you're doing it for all the wrong reasons, because you don't own the company owns you. And that means it's in your mind and in your head every moment of every day, whether you want it to be there or not, whether you're taking a shower and hanging out with friends, or you're on a weekend, or you're on vacation somewhere. And like, I don't say these things with pride, but I remember innumerable instances I have etched in my brain of standing outside restaurants and bars while my family or friends were hanging out or eating meals inside. And I was dealing with something that came up that just needed to be attended to right there, which I had hoped would take 5 minutes, but instead takes 50. And I don't complain about it, and I'm not asking for a Medal of Honor for it. This is what you do, and this is the job. And I always say, I chose this job, especially now. Like, I've done this for almost 15, 20 years now. I know exactly what this is and what this isn't. So I'm here completely voluntarily. But it's very consuming, and the sacrifice is, I think it is your time, but also your mind share, and how consuming a company is of your mental and your psychological energy, because you care so much about it. And the other way I like to describe it is like what running a company really is, and founding a company really is Friday afternoon, when you're getting ready to have a beer, a glass of wine, or whatever it is you want to do, just hang out, and you've got one more thing left to do, and then you've got a great, amazing weekend planned, and then someone texts you or Slacks you or emails you and asks you if you have a minute, and you get on the phone and you spend the next 4 days dealing with an absolute serious crisis that you had no idea before that you were going to deal with. And it's like, I say it and I know that feeling so acutely, because you just have to be ready for the world to flip on its head, both from positive to negative, but also negative to positive so quickly.
Yeah. And I worked at a startup, and our founder described being the CEO as like, there's this funnel and you're at the bottom, and everyone just throws all their shit into the funnel, and it's your job to like deal with it?
Yeah, so it's funny, and this is off script and you didn't ask this, but I think like this is actually also what growing up as a leader means and looks like, and something that I think a lot about, because that can become the situation. And that it's very easy for that to become the situation, because as a founder and CEO, you have just that much more agency and skin in the game than anybody else. And you also just know an immense amount about the business, right? I've done, not anymore, but for a period, I've done every job at Bowery. Right now, there's lots of jobs I have no qualification to do at all. But I've done many of the jobs at Bowery, and I know lots and lots and lots about this business, like the details. And it's easy to then take that in and be that funnel. But the problem is, if you think about that funnel, right, and you think about yourself sitting down there at the bottom of that funnel, if everything that then comes down that funnel has to pass through you for it to then clear out the other side of the funnel. Let's take the relevant example of the Suez Canal, right? So you have to get to the Bitter Lake, and you are the ship there blocking the passage. Imagine how few things actually can get to the Bitter Lake. It depends upon how many things you can clear out and answer and deal with. And so I actually think the most important job as you scale and as your company grows as a founder is to make sure you are not at the bottom of that funnel, except for only the critical things that really do require you to be there. And actually being self-reflective about what those things truly are and are not the things you care about, because you care about a lot of things, but the things that really require you to sit there, I actually think that's the magic of it. And that's a hard thing to do.
Yeah, knowing when to let go is always a challenge, and when to, trust your team and what you've built to kind of run on its own. That's really phenomenal advice. I think everything we talked about was incredibly useful. I think this is a good sort of point to hand it off to Amanda, who's going to lead us through the student Q&A. And we've had tons of questions pouring in. And feel free, everyone, to keep putting questions in the Q&A, and we'll try to get to as many as we can. And Amanda, take it away. Thanks again, Irving.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks, Allie. Hey, Irving, thanks so much for this. This has been really great, really interesting. Like Allie said, we've got some great questions. Okay. So first one coming from Harvey Hahn. We often hear about how finding the right co-founders is one of the most important decisions in starting a business. So can you talk a bit more about your co-founders, Brian and David, and how you work together and all that?
Yeah, I think the decision, in terms of like thinking about how you found a business and who you found a business with is an important one. And I think it requires a bunch of different components. First of all, just understanding and spending time with people. One of the number one mistakes I see people make is jumping into founding a business with people very, very quickly, based on just excitement and enthusiasm and desire to be in the game. And it's this is a very, very close relationship and interaction that you have with people. It's incredibly intimate and it's incredibly intense. And you are well served to really allow yourself and the relationships that you build in terms of co-founding to stand a little bit of the test of time before you make a decision to get involved in building a company. I think the second part of it is just being open and honest and clear with like who's doing what and who's responsible for what and how everybody fits in. Good friend of mine, Steve Schlafman, wrote something recently on Twitter. He's a former venture investor. Now he does angel investing and is a coach. And he was talking about the fact that every founding team, he suggests write out a partnership agreement before they formalize something. And I think that you sometimes see people kind of not wanting to have some of the tough conversations. I think people tend to want to push difficult conversations away. I always say, I learned this at Crowd Twist from a sales perspective. People want to tell you good news quickly, and they always want to push off bad news as long as they can, right? So people want to push off tough conversations. And the truth is, like, you're a lot better served, and it's a lot better for the people involved and your co-founders to put the tough issues or the tough questions, and maybe they're not tough, but just understand and surface those ideas and those questions ahead of time. Because if worse comes to worse and you're not going to come to an agreement, if that's the case today, that's going to be the case a year from now. And it's going to be a heck of a lot harder to unwind it for a year from now. And so I learned a lot over the time I've been doing this. And so I think I was a lot more effective in my ability when I'm working with with David and Brian at Bowery than I had been prior in my career. I just didn't know as much.
Yeah, it's funny you say it. Before starting, I came from sales. And I'm now in a class called It Makes a Lot of Sense.
Amanda, I don't know if it's my computer or yours.
Okay.
Hey,
now.
Irving.
Hey, is it Amanda's internet or mine?
I'm seeing it too. And so, yeah, I can kind of jump in, and Amanda, if your connection kind of corrects itself, then
Yeah, I was losing her for a second.
yeah, sorry about that. So yeah, the next question on our list here. Oops, sorry, let me pull it onto the screen. So from Natasha Raskin, he says, thanks for hosting this session. I'm really curious to know whether current power consumption and supply will bottleneck the process of setting up vertical farms in dense urban areas, or is the expectation that vertical farms will eventually replace farms across the country?
Yeah, so I think there's two answers to that question. The first is, one of the things for us at Bowery, sustainability is obviously really critical. One of the drivers for me was building an agricultural system that gives back more than it takes. And I talked about, earlier with Ali, agriculture is the largest consumer of resources globally. And, what we're really doing at Bowery is not just replacing farming, but we're actually replacing much of the entire supply chain. Because we control our process from seed to store. So we eliminate, trucking and all the carbon waste that comes from there, all the processing, all the different steps along the way, let alone the chemicals, et cetera. And so when thinking about sustainability for us, that goes all the way to power consumption. And so our farms are actually run on 100% renewable energy. And our farm in Maryland, which we just opened recently, has 100% low impact hydropower as well, which is really important for us. And so I think we feel incredibly optimistic looking at the renewable landscape and looking at both what's happening from a renewable generation standpoint, but equally what's happening from a transmission standpoint around renewable energy and the ability to get that to places around the country, but candidly around the world. I think we feel quite optimistic about it. Not only that, but to do it at price parity or even below, standard grid level pricing. The second side of that question is we actually don't build our farms in the middle of an urban area. Like we're not in the middle of New York City, nor candidly should we be. It doesn't make much sense for us. And, if we're 100, 200 miles outside of the city, we are closer than 99.5% of the produce, probably more than that comes into New York or wherever we're delivering anyway. And so there is more than enough renewable power in New York City itself, but there's certainly more than enough power when you kind of look at the broader surrounding areas in the cities where we are.
Yeah, and I think that is a good kind of segue into the next question, kind of thinking broadly about, the future of renewable energy and farming and sustainability. Globally, where do you see this opportunity expanding? Do you see, vertical farming as an opportunity or an option to help end world hunger and beyond?
Yeah, so I get this question, Harvey, like a reasonable amount. And I'm always cautious. If I came in here and said, hey, we at Bowery are going to end world hunger, like that would be fairly ridiculous, right? I mean, in the same way people say, oh, are you going to end climate change? I mean, I wish we alone could do that because it would be a simpler path forward. But these are, massive problems on a global scale. And so what is important is, can Bowery be an important contributor to the solution? And the answer to that and both of those questions is absolutely. Because I think there's two things happening. First of all, as you look around the world, particularly in developing countries, as those countries gain a growing middle class, that middle class has a lot more disposable income. What you very quickly see is people's diets move from cheaper, more accessible cereal grains to higher quality, fresh produce, meat, fish, things like that, right? So there's going to be an increasing demand for quality fresh food and a decreasing amount of space and ability to provide that. So our ability at Bowery to provide high quality, sustainably grown fresh produce to essentially any city around the world is an incredibly important part of this solution. And the way we do that comes down to our technology. What Ali and I were talking about earlier is we can build a farm in any city anywhere in the world, create the exact climate that we want to have. We put the Bowery operating system inside of that farm, and we have the knowledge of every crop we've ever grown and every process we've ever run immediately available in that farm. And so in essence, what we're doing is we're building a distributed network of farms. Every new farm that comes into the network benefits from the power of the network before it. And then that farm too contributes data into the network and strengthens it overall. And so as we build and grow, what we're doing at Bowery overall just gets better, more efficient, and more effective.
Yeah, and I loved what you said about, companies aren't going from zero to the final solution, overnight. It's really incremental steps. And I think, this question really speaks or asks about that. In today's world, grocery stores are a super low margin business where you have to compete for shelf space. And so have you partnered or how do you incentivize grocers and sellers to carry Bowery products versus something else?
Yeah, and so if you saw me typing a moment ago, I was trying to remember the quote that I was going to share with Ali when she was asking about what the future holds. And Bill Gates has a great quote where he says, people tend to overestimate what they'll accomplish in a year and vastly underestimate what they'll accomplish in 10 years, which is why I always say, I know what's ahead for us in general, but what's ahead 10, 20 years from us? Like I've got ideas, but one doesn't know, is kind of to your point about what the future holds. To the grocery question specifically, we're in a really fortunate position, which is in some ways this value proposition, sells itself. And of course, that's not that simple, but we have the ability to go to grocery partners and offer them a year-round, sustainably grown, local pesticide-free product. We can ensure that the supply of our product is there week in and week out. It's a lot safer. There are more food safety incidences in 2018 than there have been in the entire prior decade, any other year. And so our product, food safety, is a key part of what we do. And so it's a safer product, more surety of supply. It's a simpler product. And there's a real narrative and provenance around what we're building. I mean, we really focus on our brand as well, because as I was mentioning earlier, that question from consumers of who's growing my food, where does it come from, is an important one. And we really want to be transparent in those answers. And so when you come to a grocer with all of that, plus the ability to say, hey, guess what? This is going to last longer on your shelf, because one of the biggest issues in fresh produce for grocers is shrink. And shrink is products that go bad. And we have the ability to reduce shrink because our product is a day or two old versus weeks or months of time. And so it just goes bad less. And so produce is such an important part of the grocery store. It's the first thing you see in a grocery store, because it's what's called a determinant item, right? You don't choose your grocery store because the Oreos are particularly good at that D'Agostino or that Whole Foods. You go because of your produce and then your meat and your fish. And so these items are really important. We have a superior product with transparency and heritage and understanding, and all those things go a long way for retailers to get pretty excited about what we're doing.
Yeah, and I think, especially over the past year with the pandemic, grocery delivery has become more prominent. And I would imagine having fresh groceries that are a couple days old versus weeks, or I think the Apple example is, over a year in some cases. This question is from Bo, and I apologize, Bo, for paraphrasing, but, Bowery products have gotten into Amazon Fresh. And so can you talk about the importance and recent evolution of the last mile grocery delivery and how Bowery engages with those last mile logistics?
Yeah, I mean, in essence, and this may be a disappointing answer for Bo, but the e-commerce retailers for us are another customer, same as our brick and mortar retailers. And candidly, in many situations, the e-commerce component of brick and mortar is also becoming even more important. So the same customers that we sell to in store also have a growing and important online presence. And so one of the real advantages we do have at Bowery is we're a brand built for the omni-channel world. And so if you go and look at Amazon Fresh, you've got a robust set of content and understanding, and we can talk about the product and how we grow it and why it's better and the sustainability angles and the taste and the flavor. And so what we love about the e-commerce part of grocery is you can bring the story of your product to life much more richly and robustly than you can on a grocery store shelf, when you basically have 3 to 4 seconds of a consumer's time when they look, read, make a decision, and grab a product. And so we really thrive and enjoy that e-commerce space for those reasons, but we also have to be equally successful on a shelf of a grocery store. And I think those learning to live in both of those worlds is something that's really important to us. Some retailers we work with are only e-commerce driven. Others have e-commerce and brick and mortar together.
Gotcha. And I don't think Bo would have been disappointed with that answer. And I actually have one more question from him, which is, the Netherlands is often cited as a global leader in vertical farming. Have you been there to visit, borrowed any ideas from the Dutch? Is it a source of inspiration in it?
So they're not a global leader in vertical farming, but the Netherlands are very much a global leader in agriculture. And it sounds like Bo knows this. If anybody was around back in the 80s and knew Bo Jackson, they could appreciate that reference, but maybe not. But the Netherlands is the second largest food exporter globally, next to us. And so if you think about how small the Netherlands is, it is quite a feat for them to have gotten there. And how did they get there? Well, it's because the Netherlands really figured out and perfected greenhouse technology. I mean, they were the ones who took greenhouses to where they are today. And I think what's exciting for me and us at Bowery is we are the next evolution and the next generation of the greenhouse. And we have basically taken the torch and taken the baton from greenhouses, and we are the next technical evolution. What wasn't possible even a decade ago now is possible. And that opens up this entire new industry, which is indoor vertical farming. And so what we do really take a lot. We have partners in the Netherlands. I've been to the Netherlands multiple times, and there's an enormous amount that you can learn from the Netherlands and the Dutch and what they've understood about greenhouse growing, because there's certainly synergies and areas of overlap, but there's also lots of differences.
Yeah. And you've spoken a lot about kind of the technology being a critical driver of business. And so this next question that we have is, does Bowery Farms provide robotics tech to other farmers in the US or other countries, or do you have any plans kind of later on down the road to do that?
Yeah, we don't today. So we really focus on developing our technology, whether it's robotics and automation or the software side, for use at Bowery. We get asked about this a lot. Is it possible that eventually we could license out part of our technology or all of our technology to other markets or other areas? It's entirely possible. It's not what we're doing today.
Gotcha. Awesome. And the next question that we have, this resonates with me because I've done a ton of case competitions, and I always wonder, what happens after. But, it sounds like Bowery has partnered up with a consulting firm last year and hosted a case competition. Were you involved with that at all, and can kind of speak to it? Or
as you were saying it, I was thinking to myself, uh-oh, I literally know nothing about this. So if this is true, I'm not going to be able to say anything. So I do not know anything about it. I'm sorry to say. I think I may know what you're talking about, but not enough to give you a good answer to any question.
Yeah, and maybe the way that I can reframe it then is, are there kind of external ideas or consultations that you take and incorporate into the business, or is that a common act, or is that something that kind of stays more in-house?
Yeah, I think we've done internships and things like that at times. We actually have, I think, an extern from Fain who's working with us right now. So I'm sure there's some consultants here. So we've leveraged that program. It's hard to take ideas solely from somebody who looks from afar, has an idea, and comes. So it's not to say that there aren't good ideas there, but without the context of the business or an understanding, or even for us to know how to filter that out, you could spend a lot of time talking to people outside with different ideas to find the one nugget, which probably is not necessarily the most efficient use of time.
Gotcha. And as we start to close up here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity. You're speaking to a virtual room of MBA students. Any kind of final parting thoughts or comments that you'd like to share with the group?
Yeah, this is a smart group of people, obviously, and you guys are probably coming from all walks of life before this and going to scatter into doing all kinds of things after this. And, I think it's great that, back when I graduated, everyone just went to consulting and banking. It just felt like that was the thing to do. And it's fantastic to see that there's so many other avenues to follow now. And technology, I think, is like a real leading player in terms of opportunities. And I think folks like yourself who are excited about joining companies of all shapes and sizes, like that kind of knowledge, enthusiasm, and passion is injected into the ecosystem, whether it's in New York or somewhere else, is amazing. I think the other thing I would say is there's usually tends to be, whether it's undergrad or graduate school, people have this overhanging sense of importance with the decision you make after. Like, what I do after business school will determine everything. And I think in reality, you have a lot more latitude and a lot more flexibility in your life than you ever appreciate. And I remember feeling how incredibly important this decision of what I was going to do after college was. And I look at it now and I'm like, man, I could have went and scooped ice cream, on the Jersey Shore for a couple of years. And I'd easily still be sitting here right now. And so, I think it isn't to say one shouldn't be thoughtful and leverage the education you guys are getting. And obviously people want to generate careers, but I wouldn't put an excessive amount of pressure on oneself to get it perfect, because there pretty much is no perfect, and you're going to learn something no matter what you do. And that'll set you on a journey that should take you to a good place regardless.
Yeah, I think those are amazing words for someone who's about to graduate in a few months and kind of re-walk back into the real world, and a great message for our MBA ones on the call as well. And so, with that, on behalf of STA, I wanted to say thank you so much again for joining us for this session. And, I'll be a graduate next year, but I'd love to see you at NYU in person if we get the opportunity to chat again.
I'd love to do it. I'm, as all of you guys are, I'm more than sick of Zoom. So I'm excited for us to all get back in person, which seems like it's imminent, which is a good thing.
All right. Thank you so much, Irving. Have a
Thank
good
you,
evening.
guys.
Bye-bye.